We are on air.
All right, I'll call to order this work session for the 2nd of November, 2021. Happy Dia de los Muertos, everyone. And we will be discussing or learning about the update from the Citizens Utility Board from our Public Works Director, Peter Pasquale.
Thank you, Mayor Gamba, Council President Heise, and Council members. I'm Peter Pasquale, I'm the Public Works Director. And this afternoon, I'm going to give you an update on our CUAB committee board, and also talk about some of the projects, some of the public works projects that we've been working on as well. So let me share my screen here. Okay. Can everybody see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So as you know, our CUAB is that committee that provides council advice on our city's utility rates and our CIP program, specifically reviewing our water, wastewater, storm, and transportation programs and those rates associated with those. In the past, we would update our rates every year with our master fee schedule. In the latest go-around of our budget cycle, we shifted the master fee schedule to a 2-year master fee schedule. So that master fee schedule and those rates are only adjusted every 2 years. So this upcoming spring of 22, we'll be updating those again. So we haven't spent a whole lot of time of reviewing existing rates this past year. But we also spent time evaluating those impacts of the rates in respect to our low volume and low income residential customers to ensure affordability and equity for those customers. They work to engage with the community about our utility programs and perhaps other activities as council may ask them to do. There's 5 at-large members. Joel Bergman is our chair. Ed Simmons has been our vice chair. Laura Hanna, our secretary, and Jacob Stetson as well. Corey Hester is our newest member. He joined us this year in January or early February, and he's been a great addition to the team. He replaced Vince Alvarez, who'd been a long-time member of the CUAB. The committee has generally met over this past year about every other month. And what we've focused on over the last year, the early part of the year, we focused on discussions related to our SDCs and specifically on the wastewater SDC. And if you recall, we had a presentation from a consultant in March on our SDC rate design for wastewater. And I've got another slide that's coming up. I'll talk a little bit about that, where we are. We've been focusing on our master plans. We've had a lot of discussion about our utility rates and revenues as in relationship to the pandemic and how those those revenues have been impacted. And then we've had discussions as they focus on our CIP projects and project reviews from both Steve and I to the council. So this year in general has probably been a little less busy than previous years, but as we move into this budget cycle, we're going to be pretty busy as a committee. I did mention to you we did talk about SDCs this past spring, and I wanted to give you an update on where we were. It's been a long time since March. We're already into November. But part of what we had to do was go through the process of developing the CIP recommendations for the wastewater utility. and then provide that information to the financial consultant that's working with Water Systems Consulting on the wastewater master plan. And then they were going to take that information and develop an SDC structure. So currently I've scheduled to meet with the consultant to do a staff review of their analysis on November 12th. And then ideally we'll be coming back to the council with those recommendations for the wastewater SDC. I did want to point out where we were on the other ones and where they fit into the schedule. So our water SDC, I think what we're looking at doing is planning an update in calendar year 2022. So we'll be working on that probably the next summer and into the fall of next year. Our stormwater SDC, that's going to be incorporated into our 2024 update of our stormwater master plan. And then the transportation SDCs, that will also be done after the completion of the TSP. And then there's just some basic information there on how those fees are structured, the SDCs are structured. So are there any questions on that?
I was curious about what the administration fee is that we have on water, but on nothing else. Can you clarify what that is?
You know, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I can get back to you. There's a small fee when we did the analysis back in 2010 that allows a small component of the SDC to be in. Oh, I know what it's basically for the development. You can recapture the development costs, the costs associated with the development of the SDCs themselves.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think in 2010 that was structured to do that. I'll follow up and make sure that's the case and let you know.
Peter, I just wanted to say this is a nice simple chart, and I'm wondering if it's available to the public anywhere, just because we receive, and I know some of the language is not going to be transparent to the general public, but we hear so much confusion about what do all these different fees mean on my bill that it strikes me that something like this might be useful somewhere on the website someplace. I don't have any suggestion where.
Well, we don't have this on the SDC webpage, but we can certainly put something there. So this doesn't include the park SDC that is passed on to NCPRD or another component of the wastewater SDCs that Wes charges. So these are our local SDC charges.
And I think that the way to handle that would just be to say those fees that you see are not actually fees that you receive from the city of Milwaukee, which is kind of nice to, show that is somebody else, not us, responsible for those.
Yeah, we'll take a look at putting something up on the website to update that. Now, our master fee schedule does provide some comparative data as it relates to our utility bills, but not as it relates to SDCs. Okay. So moving on to the next year, what we're planning on doing is, as we begin our budget cycle for putting together the budget, we're going to be pretty busy over the next several months into the spring, and starting in December, evaluating our current CIP and the recommendations from the water and wastewater master plans, and making sure that those are the most priority needs from the master plans are reflected into our large CIP plan. And then I also intend to walk the CUAB through the wastewater SDC review that the consultant's doing. to get their feedback on it as well. Moving into January, we'll be continue to focus on the CIP and having discussions about revenue projections. So we've already started the process with finance on developing our revenue projections for the next several years based off of the latest financial data, utility consumption data that we've got over the last 2 years for fiscal years 20 and 21. I met with Joe Gardner today to talk about those data requirements so we can start building that revenue projection model. And then based off of those revenue projections and the expense projections that we've identified in the budget, we'll have discussions about our rate recommendations in the early part of February, getting ready for our February 28th joint budget and CUAB meeting to talk about CIP projects and some of the rate implications of those projects as well. And then in the spring, making sure we're getting the rates and master fee schedules updated. And as I said earlier, moving into the summer and fall, we're going to start talking about that water SDC update. So that's sort of generally where we're looking at over the next year. Any questions there? Okay, I was hoping for more questions. So moving on, what I did want to highlight some projects that we've been working on that probably we haven't had an opportunity to talk as much about as we have on some of our safe and transportation projects, and give you an update on where those are. One of the projects we worked on in our public works department with a consultant team was doing a risk and resiliency assessment of our water utility and updating our emergency response plan. And this was as a result of the American Water Infrastructure Act that was, I believe, passed in 2017 and mandated water utilities to do a reassessment of their physical security, their cybersecurity systems that they have in place as a utility, and their facilities. So we had put money in our budget to do this, and we went through that process in the late winter, early spring, and we completed the risk and resiliency assessment. And that assessment, we looked at all of the different water assets that we have, the wells, the treatment facilities, our distribution systems, our SCADA systems, all the different systems that we have that are necessary and critical to provide water. And then we sort of took a look at what are the potential threats to those systems and what would be the impacts of having that threat do something to one of those assets. And then what those consequences were and the potential vulnerability assessment. I'm going to be sort of vague on some of these things because you don't really want to point out like what those vulnerable areas are in particular. But we went through this process and then, did a risk assessment, resiliency assessment, and documented this information. And then, we were required to certify the plan and submit it to the US EPA. The last time the city did something like this was around 2003, 2004. There was a risk assessment that the utilities had to do then. But in general, the types of threats that we looked at were sabotage, earthquake, and wildfire. Those are generally like the top three risks that our type of utility would face, and what are those impacts on those systems. And from those assessments, we use that information also and rolled it into our water master plan, and identified some projects or some areas to include in projects as we move forward into the future. Specifically on cybersecurity, that's always a big issue. So we have a SCADA project that I'm going to talk a little bit about, but we've have identified potential issues with our current system, and we're making improvements to that to reduce those cybersecurity threats. From that risk and resiliency assessment, one of the next steps that we had to take was updating our water emergency response plan, and that's really our guide to how to respond to potential water issues. And these are more of the sort of localized water issues, not like regional water issues, but more or less if we have a problem in our utility local to the community. We worked on that with the consultant as well, Brenna Cruz. Before she left, she was part of that team in her role as in emergency response, and played a great role in that effort as well. We completed that plan, that update to that plan this summer, and just recently sent in the certification to the US EPA as well. So this was something we really hadn't talked about before, but we've got that completed, and we've met the requirements of the law, and I think we had a good product put together, and actually had the opportunity to make some good improvements to our emergency response plan from that.
Peter, did that risk and resiliency assessment include looking at industrial sites and risk of toxic spills affecting our groundwater supply and kind of stuff like that? Or was it really more focused on, I don't know, external threats, I guess is what you would call them?
We did have a discussion about contamination, but we didn't drill down to like site-specific contamination from certain industries. So it was sort of a general contamination.
Okay.
But that is a threat, but it wasn't like one of the top. Didn't come out to be one of the top 3 threats.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks.
Can I ask about the emergency response plan? Is that something where you talk about like interties and backup systems and all of that?
Yes.
So did you tell us, we have an intertie with Clackamas River Water and with Portland, is that right?
We have an intertie with CRW and Portland. And
you're working or talking about an intertie with Oak Lodge?
That is correct. We're working on the potential intertie with Oak Lodge as well.
Okay. I was just trying to remember. And it was our intertie with Portland. It was when we used that we had a boil water. Oh, that was before your time, but Anne will remember it because she was brand new and it was trial by fire for her.
It was the Portland intertie that we used.
And is that a normal thing? Like when you haven't used an intertie for a while, there's some kind of contamination like that?
No, it shouldn't be a normal thing. I mean, we should certainly make sure that there's certain precautions that we take before we open those systems up, and to make sure that we're not having contamination. My understanding, it was more of an issue related to, not necessarily to the actual intertie itself, but just
to our testing.
What's that?
It was our testing. It wasn't the intertie.
Exactly, the testing procedures that we were following to sample the water. So we contaminated it was like an operator contamination of the sample.
Oh, really? Oh, I never knew that. Okay.
You know.
That's interesting. Okay.
But flushing the lines is a part of what we do. And it is a part of the ongoing work that Peter and his water team do to make sure that we don't have contamination into the system. It is not common, but it is a problem if you leave a space vacant for a long period of time. That's why we do so much of the work on the interties. It's also why creating interties isn't a one-time stopgap measure. It's not something we do once and then just let sit until we need it. It's something that we have to manage ongoing. And Peter's team does a great job of that.
Okay. Thank you.
And these interties, one of the reasons why we're looking to also develop an intertie with Oak Lodge is just to have that additional flexibility with the three adjacent water providers in case the other two have an issue. We've got another source, and perhaps they can also rely on us if they have a problem as well.
Is Oak Lodge taking water from the same aquifer? Or are they a different source?
They're a surface water utility.
Okay.
So, generally you don't want to mix groundwater and surface water just because of the chemical characteristics of the water can cause problems inside the distribution system if you're not careful. So in general, you don't if there's large differences in pH between the water. And pH is a logarithmic scale. So, when you go from a pH of 7 to a pH of 8, that's 10 times, an order of magnitude of 10 times larger. So you got to be cognizant of those different things, but there's ways to mitigate those issues as well. So okay, I did want to talk about our SCADA project, and as a reminder, our SCADA system is a tool that we use for remote monitoring and control of our water treatment, distribution, and our wastewater pump stations. The system that we have in place was last upgraded in 1998, so it's old. We have issues with it. We end up having lots of communication errors that cause us problems. But generally, the way that it works is there's a secure communications interface between the computers that we have to run the systems and the field automation equipment. The PLC, that stands for Programmable Logic Controller. That's part of the field automation equipment that helps us, that automates systems at our treatment facilities or in the distribution system, tells things when to turn on and turn off, or how much chlorine to add, and those types of things. So the system we had is old. We went through a process and developed a master plan to identify what type of improvements that we wanted to make. And then in 2020, the early part of 2020, we hired a consultant, Tetra Tech, to begin the design process of that SCADA system. And it's taken a little bit longer than we wanted to, than we'd hoped. But what we're looking at in this upgrade is we're going to have a new design that is going to bring us up to current standards, current sort of industry standards. We'll have sort of the same level that our public safety systems have that they rely on. And we're going to have multiple layers of redundancy in terms of backing up our computer systems, but also in the way that the system communicates with each other. We're going to be able to have the ability to do remote management and access from the office, from mobile devices, and the operators, instead of having to come in and review alarms on site, they'll be able to do some things from home, which will drastically reduce the amount of overtime and allow people to get better night's rest sometimes. You know, one of the things that I realized early on when I got here was the fact that our systems are decentralized. We have 2 treatment plants, one next to the police station that takes wells number 4 and 7, and we treat the water there for VOCs. And then we have our upper treatment plant at 40th and Harvey. There's 3 wells that feed into there. Those all operate remotely, so they're decentralized. We don't have somebody that's there 24/7, responding to alarms. So in the evenings, we have somebody on call that has to go out and come from home and drive in and respond to an alarm. Many of those alarms are really sort of simple fixes that can be done remotely. Could be done remotely if we had that set up. You know, adjustments could be made remotely. So that's one of the features that we're adding to this. And that's going to be able to take us from that decentralized sort of management of that system to a more centralized management. And we'll be able to manage the system from any location. So that's really sort of important. And with the size of our utility, the number of people I've had, it's really sort of important to reduce those impacts on our employees in the after hours and on the weekends. So I wanted to really sort of show you where we are within the project. So we're getting pretty close here. We're in the process of finalizing the bid documents for the communications component of the project and the automation component. So the communications component is the cellular, wireless, and the narrow and broadband radios that we're going to install for communications. And then the automation piece are the upgrades and the programming that we're making to the systems in their different locations to do things. So we have that capability to do those things. Looking at the chart here, there's a lot of information on there, but you can see as those boxes become clear, that means we're closer to those things being completed. And then it's identified who's got those responsibilities to do that. Tetra Tech is our consultant doing that. So we're getting, like I said, we're getting very close to getting those bid documents finalized. And we've had some issues over the time that's impacted our schedule that weren't foreseen that I'll get into. The issues. This is why it's taken us a little bit longer than I had hoped. Ideally, when we started this project, I had hoped that we were going to be done like this fall with the work, that the project would be designed and the contractor would be out there and it'd be finished. But the schedule's been impacted by quite a lot of different things. First and foremost, the pandemic really sort of impacted the site visits that were necessary to go do some of the detailed design, to go in and work in close quarters with our staff inside the cabinets to identify the wiring and making sure and understanding how things worked and how the programming worked. That impacted it. We got an initial start in the early part of 2020, and then we sort of came to a halt there and tried to do some things remotely. but it didn't work. But we made up that ground there, and we've got somebody actually on site sort of finishing up some of those final design details as it relates to those sites. We did have some design workshops scheduled this spring to walk our water crew through the design and talk about the design and the needs of the team for the SCADA. That was impacted by our availability of staff, and one of the reasons why was because of an injury one of our critical employees had that put that employee out of work for about 8 to 10 weeks. So we had to shift those schedules and wait for that person to come back to work. We've had some impacts related to IT staff availability. Brandon will tell you he's lost some people. He's got getting contracts put into place, and that's impacted some of the network infrastructure and cellular routers that they're supposed to be installing out at the different remote sites as part of the work that our IT staff is doing. But I think Brandon's got that under control. And then we've had issues with, you've heard about these supply chain issues. So we've had issues with equipment availability, all along with sort of the technical equipment that we've needed, whether it be the most recent one's been the routers, but we had issues with servers that Brandon was getting and ordering that just sort of impacted the schedule, and all these things sort of cascaded and made it difficult to get things done. And then, honestly, our well number 2 project that we're doing with our well, which has also been impacted by some equipment availability, impacted some of the work as well. We had hoped that was going to be completed and we'd have everything set up there, but because it's not, and some of the uncertainty related to the completion of that, we had to do some redundant planning to make sure that we had our bases covered if the well 2 wasn't completed when we're ready to contract the actual SCADA work. Any questions on that? So where we are now is I anticipate that in January, we'll be soliciting for the SCADA physical communications and field automation work. There's going to be 2 contracts for that, and then we'll work with our consultant to help us with that construction assistant. Tetra Tech will help us with that to manage that project as well. So there will be a construction assistance services contract with Tetra Tech that you'll be seeing soon as well. Some work to get that done.
And do you anticipate any budget impacts from being, you're not terribly delayed, but by being a few months later? Or?
No, not, I think so far we're okay. Not any major budget impacts.
Great.
I did want to talk about well 2. So our well number 2 is, it's located at 40th and Harvey. And our current well is, existing well you can see is on the upper right side of the building where it says existing well number 2. So that's the well that has it has a cracked casing. This is the well that we're replacing. We still use it, but it doesn't have the capacity that it used to. We've built a new building adjacent to the fire station here. In 2019, we drilled a new well 390 feet down. Our next, what we're waiting on right now has been the pump. So here's like the inside on the left side, the inside of the building, sort of the piping and pump. So the pipe, it's a vertical turbine line shaft pump. It sits on a pedestal, and there's goes down into the well casing, and then we'll pump the water out back into the system, to the treatment plant, and then to the wells. We've had some significant delays as it relates to the availability of this pump. So that deep well line shaft turbine pump is like the most important part of the project, because without it, we can't get water out of the ground. But we've had just some major issues, and generally they've been related to the supply chain issues, getting the pump manufactured. But there's also been some other issues that we've had. There's been some long drawn out conversations related to the anchor bolt calculations, how the pump would be anchored to the pedestal. This pedestal here, making sure that we had it appropriately anchored structurally, so when it's pumping, it doesn't move and it doesn't shift the anchor, the line shaft. That was resolved, but that caused some concern. There was some concerns with on both sides with the manufacturer and the consultant on the appropriate anchor bolt calculations. The supply chain, like I said, supply chain issues have really been problematic. And then once they manufactured the pump and got everything up and running, there was an issue with testing the pump itself. The first time they tested the pump, it didn't meet the pumping requirements, the efficiencies that we required. So they had to take it apart and check the tolerances and make some changes to it. That's been done, and it's passed the pump testing and met the requirements. And now we are expecting the delivery of that pump. My fingers are crossed, next week. But I've been told that, and I've shared this with Ann on multiple occasions, that keeps changing. But this is the latest. So next Thursday, we're expecting the pump to be delivered.
Just be prepared. It has changed dozens of times, it feels like, at this point. So don't get too excited.
Peter, is this well one of those that pulls from the water table that seems to have the trichloroethylene?
It is. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to point out something. So, we've done several studies. We worked with DEQ on analyzing the contamination and the potential contamination paths to our wells. We did a study last year that reviewed the relevant data and studies that had been done in the past to sort of take a look at, are we missing anything? Is there further information that we need to do to make sure that we're making good decisions with our utility and being protective of our water? And what we found was that we are, in fact, and that the primary source of contamination for VOCs in the community actually relate to the former Stanley Proto Tool site it was on 32nd, not the McFarland site where Monroe Apartments are. That site was a former, had Creo site use there for railroad ties or utility poles and things of that nature. That type of contamination generally isn't as impactful to groundwater, doesn't migrate as much as some of the contamination from the Stanley Proto Tool site. One of the recommendations that we got from the study was to continue to monitor our wells. And, we worked with DEQ and identified what those monitoring requirements are. They've worked with the Stanley Proto Tools people and said, hey, we still need to continue to monitor these things and keep track of what's happening with the VOCs. But yes, well number 2 is one of those sites that is impacted by VOCs. We also did take a look at if these wells were impacted by potential contamination from precision cast parts. We took a look at the groundwater modeling there, and that's not the case. We're not being impacted by precision cast parts in that space. It's, like I said, primarily from the former Stanley Proto Tool site. I did want to talk a little bit about the next steps. So we're waiting on this delivery of this pump. So, we'll receive that pump, and then we've got to put it down into the well, into the casing. And what that's going to entail is we've got a removable roof that was put on the building. So the contractor will remove that removable portion of the roof. They're going to install the pump and get it leveled and censored, get it leveled. They'll put the roof back on and then get everything wired up. And then we'll go through, electrical and circuit tests to make sure things are working appropriately electrically. And then we'll take our well number 2 offline, the current well number 2 offline, and do some operational testing of the new pump. And while we're doing that operational testing, that water is going to be discharged into the sanitary sewer through our stormwater system, through a required treatment system that we'll put in place. So because there's probably some sediments that have built up inside the well casing that'll come out. So we'll make sure those aren't deposited into the stormwater system. We'll take water samples to make sure for coliform sampling to make sure that it's meeting our raw water requirements. And then we'll place our current well 2 back online, submit those samples, have OHA review the test samples and the as-builts for their final approval. And then once we receive OHA's final approval on the as-builts and the sampling, we'll take the old well offline and put the new one into operation. And then at that point, we'll decommission the old well. So that's what we've got left to do. Everything up to the decommissioning should happen pretty quickly. It shouldn't take all that much time to get completed. So, somewhere in 30 to 40 days, we should have that done and the new well online if everything looks good.
Let me ask what is probably a dumb question, but so the water comes through the new well, it's treated there, it goes to our treatment plant there, and then it goes into the reservoirs? Or
It
does
does.
it go into the reservoirs untreated and get treated coming out of the reservoirs?
It goes into the reservoirs treated.
Okay.
So we aerate the water so it flows through these towers, not reservoir towers, but towers that we have at the treatment plants.
Mhm.
And there's these plastic balls that are in there, and the water cascades through that. And that cascading, and then we have some blowers that introduce air to help aerate the water, and that aeration of that water helps dissipate any VOCs that might be present. And our raw water samples, from what I've seen over the last 4 years, those raw water samples prior to treatment meet the maximum contaminant levels. Anyway, so we're actually reducing it down even further than would be required. There could be times. There were times though where in the past where they did exceed those maximum contaminant levels, and that was the reason why the city installed those treatment facilities.
And we use both that. I mean, obviously, we use the big elevated storage because we just spent a lot of money to upgrade to maintain it. But we also use that ground tank there at 40th and Harvey.
We do, yeah. It's the 1 million gallon concrete reservoir from I think it's 1929. We do, yeah.
So Peter, when you said that generally speaking, the raw water actually meets safety standards, is that just barely, or is that?
When I say just,
You didn't say just barely. I'm asking.
Yeah.
Does it meet it well, or is it like one of those squeaker kind of things?
well, I'm not going to say it's a squeaker kind of thing, but we only sample every so often, so it's not like we're sampling the raw water every day to see if it's meeting the standards. So depending on how we're pumping and groundwater flows, how the groundwater is moving, there certainly could be exceedances prior to treatment that we don't see. It's close enough to where it makes really, really good sense to treat the water. It reduces any risk to the risk to the community.
Right. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Anything.
Well, that's pretty much what I had for this afternoon. Are there any other questions?
Not seeing anybody frantically raising their hands or talking on mute or anything like that. All right. Well, thank you, Peter. It was illuminating as always.
Thanks.
Good to know that things like our water system are in such capable hands. All right. Well, if that is it, then we will go into executive session and Scott, go for it.
Okay. All right. Following the work session, council will meet in executive session pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute ORS 192.6602E to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions, and I, to review and evaluate job performance of a chief executive officer, other officers, employees, and staff if the person whose performance is being reviewed and evaluated does not request an open hearing. And I'm remembering that I'm reading the wrong one because there's a third citation, which is over here. Just a second. And third, And H, to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So I will see you all momentarily on the other Zoom link, right, Scott?
That's right.
Okay.